What is Newton's third law? Start you out for every reaction. Yeah, I hate that version. And the main reason I hate that version of it is that the term reaction in that expression is different than the term reaction to what is used in everyday life. If I'm scared, I will react. That is not Newton's third law. I once had a fellow student, I was still a student, who commented about a mass murderer that it was a natural reaction to the abuse that the person had suffered. Newton's third law, it was natural. And no, that's a misuse. Or the unfortunate case of the middle school, I said they were middle school students who posted a video online that had a bowling alley, and one bowling ball hit another one, and the one that got hit moved, and they said, the action is the first ball hit it, the reaction is the second ball moved. That is not Newton's third law. Newton's third law is first ball hits the second ball pushed back on the first ball. That is the reaction. It has nothing to do with what happens after the force is applied. It is while the force is applied, you'll have the same magnitude of force, opposite directions, pointing at different objects. And that, when we did force diagrams, that's when we talked about it. I'm going to write out the long, tedious version of it, but more accurate. If object A exerts a force on object B, object B exerts a force back on A where the two forces are of equal magnitude. I guess equal magnitude and type, but opposite directions. Exerts a force back on it. Opposite directions. Now, I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate that. It just, the other version that I keep seeing popping up just bothers me. There is, of course, a shorthand. Because why write all that out when you can do it in a couple of letters? The shorthand version of this, and I will write it up again, it's not something to regurgitate, it's just the shorthand notation. If I write F with the subscript AB, this is the force on A from B. That is equal to the negative of the force on B from A. This is just the shorthand version of Newton's third law. But all this might still seem like too much, so let's get more concrete. But first, any questions on this before we concretize it? A dog pushes, pulls east on a leash. Actually, they don't usually pull on the leash, they pull on the collar. So on a collar, with 7 newtons of normal force. So I got a dog being held by a collar. There could be a leash attached to the collar, could be a hand attached to the collar. It's just the collar's what's touching the dog. The dog is pulling on this collar. And the question is, based on Newton's third law, what else has to be true? Well, all forces require two objects. What are the two objects involved? Yes. Dog and collar. They are exerting a force of, first up, what is the force that the dog exerts? Not stopping there.
East.
There we go. They have magnitude and direction. There's my magnitude. There's my direction. And there's the type of force right there. So by Newton's third law, all we're doing is we switch the objects and change the direction. So if I did that, I'd have, well, I'm going to switch dog and collar. So a collar pulls west on a dog with 7 newtons of normal force.
-7.
I changed the direction by actually indicating west instead of east. I could have kept east and just put a negative in front of the 7 newtons, but it's less traditional that way. Odds are on the first test, there's going to be some question like this, where I give you a statement and then give you multiple choice for each part of, you basically circle the ones that are necessary in order to create the other part of the pair. Maybe you'll find a more interesting way of doing it. That's Newton's third law. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Newton's third law just because we were doing it when we were doing force diagrams. Forces come in pairs, they have no different objects, they're in opposite directions. We use the same letter to assign them both. They indicate the same magnitude, same type. Questions? We have not assigned the test. I think we should. So it's the master set 4-5. Why don't we say it's due a week from today? Set 4, 5 should be just one of them, and then I don't have. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. Just so we have this bigger time slot. Friday of next week.
Would the middle numbers be 37?
It would be. Thank you. So the test, Friday of next week, or we can put it off a week. I think having it on during the lab period is, so that there's plenty of time, works best, but we could do it during other times also. I guess that would be the 27th.
Open book or no open book?
No open book.
In person?
Pardon?
In person?
Yes.
Do you do like Scantron or something like that?
No.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Hated Scantron. Good. One, there's no partial credit. And two, there's always that stray mark. I took the PSAT in the school gym, and they used the basketball timer, the time. And so just a couple seconds left, I realized I had an answer wrong. And so I went down to make the change, and then the buzzer goes off. When it's dead silent and the buzzer goes off, I went and put a huge mark across the entire test. Although I don't use a basketball timer, it still scars. put your pencils down. No, I'm going to erase first. All right, so looks like a week from Friday. It'll be fun in a bizarre kind of way.
Will we get to review for it on the Thursday?
If you have questions, I would be glad to answer them. If there are no questions, I'm gonna move it on. Let me talk about test corrections. Since that will usually come up at some point. There will be test corrections, so. So basically, original grade, I'm gonna simplify it down to just 5 grades. There are pluses and minuses, but you got an A, 4, B, C, D, and an F. Just assume those are the only grades. Technically, there's a -1 if you decide not to take it. I did have a student a number of years ago who opted, there's a 251 student, or 252, one or the other, who opted not to take any tests and just get all his points back for test corrections. When you took the class the second time, he did not take that tack. So my recommendation is don't go for that. If you get an A as the original grade, then the best possible that you can get with test corrections is an A+. If you failed it, you can bring it up to a C. And then that basically sets up the scale. So if you got a C on it, you could bring it up to halfway in between at 3.15, and so on. There's a formula I could write down if you desire, or just sort of go with the spirit of what we have here. What you're trying to do on test corrections is you're trying to convince me that you understand the problem. So the ideal is there's a chance for you still to learn the material that you didn't understand that day of the test. It's more relaxed, the fact that you got some time to do it. And so you're trying to convince me that you understand. You can work with other people, but if I see 2 people hand in identical answers, identical step by step, line for line, in one case, misspelling for misspelling, and so forth, then I'm not gonna play the game of who did the original and who copied. I will assume that neither of you understand what's going on, and you get nothing. I did have a student, when doing test corrections, just provided answers. That gets you nothing. You're trying to convince me that you understand. So let's say it's a 120-point test, and you got 60 of them right, and that was a C, or 2.0. So you missed 60 points. Now, when you do the test, you convince me that you understand some of it. Not everything was convincing, but you convinced me that you understand, let's say, 2/3 of what you missed. So what I'm gonna do is, you got your original grade, plus the number of points that you convinced me that you understand, divided by the number that you missed, times how many possible points you could get back on the total test. Well, if you got a 2 and you can bring it up to a 3.15, then you could have, you possibly add 1.15 to the test. And so whatever that ends up being, that's the grade. I don't round off from this. So, questions on test corrections?
Are we allowed to ask you for help?
Yes. All right, moving on. Pardon?
Okay, is the questions for the test gonna come from the master set and the homework quizzes, or just?
The master sets at this point are all from old tests.
Oh,
So if you look under supplemental material, there should be a section called old tests, and you can look at that for old tests. Some of them have answers, some have solutions, some are just the test with nothing else. If there's one that you've worked on and you want a solution for it, you can ask about it in class, or I had one student a number of years ago who said, I would like a solution written up for this test and these problems. And so I did that, posted them. It was not in a meeting, it was, hey, if you could get this done by tomorrow, that'd be great. Sure. You'll notice a certain sameness with the tests, with occasional variation. The way I make my tests is I'm going to, basically, every semester, I've got a different folder for every semester and the tests I've written for the first test. I'm gonna go through, close my eyes, move the cursor up and down, and I'm gonna click. Wherever I click, that's gonna be the starting point. So I'm gonna take that test, call it the model. And then highlight the whole thing, put everything in yellow, so I know what the original test was. I then go through and go, hey, I like this question, I'm gonna, you know what, I'm gonna change numbers. This was a really horrible question, I'm throwing this one out. I've asked this question over and over again. Let's try a different way of looking at the same thing. Or I watched something on TV last night which inspired me, so how about put in that question? And some of those questions become regular questions, and some of those I later regret. But like being chased by a bear, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the person you're with.
Seems kind of harsh.
Pardon?
I said that seems kind of harsh.
That, a little less harsh. You're all in the same boat. The general philosophy is that if everybody misses a question, it was probably a bad question. Unless there's conspiracy. And I think I've had one class that I think could have pulled it off. They didn't, but there's one where they were small enough and cohesive enough that they could have pulled it off had they tried.
The first test will be on everything that we've covered so far.
Yep, 2 through 5.
And master set, that's due next week. You said 4/5.
Yeah, it's one master set.
Okay.
It's just-
Oh, it's called 4/5. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
The master set is just one page, right?
I think so. I tried to, for the most part, I tried to put them on one page. Because of pictures, I couldn't get the chapter 2 and chapter 3 on one page, but I think that might be the last one, that the 2 and 3 are the only ones not on one page.
Yeah, it's just 9 questions.
Yeah, that sounds right. I will say the master sets for chapters 6 through 10 are not based on old test questions. But for the, definitely 2 through 5, those are old test questions.
Do all your old tests line up to your new test when it comes down to material? So like if I looked at an old test that was test 1, do you guys like a study guide?
For physics 110, yes, they all line up. So test 1 definitely lines up.
Right.
There are some later tests that might be called test 4 one semester and test 3 a different semester. It should have under the old test which chapters were involved.
Okay, cool.
And then the linear motion lab that we just did, it'll be due this Friday.
Yes.
And then I was looking for the lab for this Friday, I couldn't find it on the.
I have not posted it yet.
Oh, okay.
The lab for this Friday will not be due on the day of the test. I don't want labs. If you have to choose between finishing a lab or studying for the test, I'd rather you study for the test. So the lab that you do this Friday will officially be due the week after the test.
Are we doing a lab after the test?
No, just the test. Unless you want to, if you want to hang out and just experiment,
Extra credit?
only in here. Or I guess in your heart, it matter. You die, go to heaven, St. Peter's goes, so, did you do any extra work in lab that you didn't have to do? Yeah, I did. All right, you're in. I think that's the way it works. I don't know, I have to check my sources. You were an English major? Oh, sorry. I don't care how much extra you did. cruel. This was thereby condemning my daughter to hell. But she knows she has it coming. She knows she's a redhead. Come on, what do you expect? Any redheads in here? No? When my daughter was in kindergarten, the parents were supposed to write an introduction to the child. My wife and I independently, the very first line was, Tiamat is a redhead. Okay. We're going to start out with Newton's third law. This is chapter 6. This is not on the first test.